Hello and welcome to the 2021 Sex Worker Tax Information Seminar Series. We have been having some technical difficulties, and that might continue. That might continue to happen. we might continue to have technical difficulties.
It's been a ride.
Yeah,
It's been a ride. Yeah.
it's fine. But we are so pleased to be here and to give you as much more information that can help you with your taxes as we possibly can. And so just to start off, I'll just let you know I'm Fox Riker. I am a professional dominatrix and a kink coach. So I help people discover what their interests are and then how to engage in those interests in a way that's healthy, sane, consensual. So that's me. And then this is Jay. Jay can talk about himself.
With a mid-size healthcare network in Pennsylvania, and got my start in doing small business bookkeeping and tax record maintaining. And for me to use my base of knowledge to this undertaking that we've started here.
Yeah, because we did this 2 years ago. We meant to do it last year also, but last year was 2020. So
yeah, we're disregarding the existence of last year.
Yep. So that being said, a lot has changed. A lot has changed since 2019. A lot. So many things. But including things that have changed with taxes. And so do you want to just talk a little bit about like things that we went over last time that have changed since we did the last one, since 2019?
Well, actually, what I'd like to do is give kind of a recap of what we did. It turns out in the world of taxes, it actually is not a lot that's changed.
Right.
And in terms of the content that we covered 2 years ago, it's really only the stuff that we covered in the very, very last few minutes of our 2-hour-long streams. So probably more useful for us to get in touch with what we've covered. So anybody who get more of an in-depth look, they'll know which of our prior videos would contain that information. And for anybody who just needs a brief once-over, this will fulfill that need. So let me start off with just saying why it is that Fox and I decided to do this. That, we saw a need, and we saw that we could fill that need. Yeah. It's something that we're both committed to. Bringing to the world something that we have to offer. And what we're doing here, what we're doing with this live stream, is helping you understand tax matters as they relate to what you're doing as a business. So this is distinct from the world of personal taxes. While we could answer those questions, they're unique, not unique. I'm sorry, they're ubiquitous. They apply to everyone. That is harder to get as it relates to running your, and whether or not you are running a business. That's something else that we have talked about and will cover. So let me go over what we covered in the first video that we did in 2019. We started off with why file taxes at all. And the reason is several layers to it, but they're very closely related. First of all, it protects yourself. So it reduces your risk and reduces reduces your exposure to risk. But there's an overarching one. It gives you peace of mind. If you have done what there is to do, the way it's to be done, intended to be done, then of your mind. We've got other things to be concerned with in life. Not you've crossed your T's and dotted your I's with taxes doesn't need to be one of them. And that's what we're here to provide for you. Provide.
Yep. I think, I just remember I was like, gosh, there's just not a lot of free information for sex workers about how to do your taxes. And you were the one person I knew who I could go to and ask. And you're just, obviously you're just the one person that made sense because you're somebody who just cares so much. And like you said, like I think one of the things that we both love about each other is that we both care so much. And if we see something that we can put in, we do. And so, you just absolutely were the person to partner with to bring as much information to people as possible. So thank you so much for being you. And
well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So what do people need to know?
Perfect. So, the content that we started to go into with our first video was, does the IRS care what you do? And the answer is a clear, emphatic no. The IRS is actually constitutionally forbidden from even poking its nose into whether or not your money has been earned from an above-board source or something outright illegal. They don't care. They're not even allowed to inquire. And the only thing that they're concerned with is getting their cut. So it's like, doesn't matter what the source is, just give them their slice of it, and you are home free. You are out of trouble as far as the IRS is concerned. So part of what we'll be talking about, or what we did talk about, and what we will touch on again is what is it then that you would be reporting, or when do you need to report? So we are looking at what counts as business income. And that is any money or property that you receive in exchange for providing a service or product, but really we're talking about services in this world. People often ask, like, well, what if it was given to me as a gift or a tribute? And the test there is, was anything expected in return? And what could have been expected in return, it would include, say, emotional support or companionship. And as you can get, that's starting to draw a fine line. It's like, well, when is it just a relationship between two people? That's the flow of money between two people in a relationship is no tax consequence. Well, that's the test. The test is, are you in an emotional or romantic relationship with this person, or is it an arrangement where you are actually providing a service for someone in exchange for money or property? So if it's the latter, then whatever you receive does need to be counted towards your income. And if it's a gift of an object, like a jewelry or something, you need to count the fair market value of it. And obviously you've got some leeway there. Like who's going to test, well, how much was that bracelet actually worth?
So are you saying that that if as a financial dominatrix, are you saying that all of my tributes, like all of the things that people just buy me off my wish list, stuff like that I should be counting that as income? Like technically?
It depends on whether or not the giver has an expectation of receiving anything in return. So if you're not even obligated to be in communication with them, um, it, in communication meaning like, well, in exchange for this gift, I get to call you up and vent my feelings or whatever. That might be you providing a service to them. If there's no expectation of any receiving anything in return, then it's a gift. And there is also, there's kind of a reasonableness test for that. Once you start getting up into amounts like in over $10,000, it gets a lot grayer. It's like because the IRS is watching for large transfers like that being claimed to have been gifts when it's actually being used to skirt tax laws. But if you're talking about someone, buying you what, new computer, nice microphone.
I just got a new, very nice microphone. So
Yeah, something like that. If there's no expectation of anything specific in any a provision of a service in return, then that's fine. That's a gift.
cool.
So the next category is what then counts as an expense for you as a business person. And there's several tests for whether or not a particular expenditure can be counted as a business expense and can be claimed as a deduction on your taxes. First and foremost, it must be ordinary and necessary for the type of business that you're in. Now that begs the question, hey, what about this type of business? So on one particular tax form, there is a place to put in a 6-digit job code. This identifies whether you are a consultant or a advisor, if you're in mining, if you're in agriculture, if you're in accounting. They have hundreds of different codes for different careers. The trick is to pick the one that's the closest match for whatever you particularly do. And here's what those codes do for the IRS. They just let them know what kinds of expenses they should expect to see for that line of work. So if what you do involves a lot of travel, being a consultant might be the best match. If what you do involves a lot of makeup or clothing purchases, maybe modeling is a better match for what you do. So it does depend on whatever would seem like something reasonably similar to what you do. That then determines whether or not an expense is ordinary and necessary to that line of work. Now, the next test, this is a critical one. It must be something that's solely for income-producing purposes, not suitable for personal use. And the example we used in our video in 2019 was makeup. It's obviously very easy to have makeup that's for personal use. How then do you determine that particular makeup purchase was for professional use, for producing income? And the best way to do that is to keep the purchases completely separate. Only keep track of the expenditures for the stuff you bought for professional purposes. If you're doing a photo shoot, if you're doing a modeling session.
Do you recommend having a separate bank account for, like, do you recommend for people who have sole proprietorships, do you recommend having a business bank account that is something that you use to keep track of that? Is that something that you recommend, or is that unnecessary?
Excellent question. In the past, years ago, I used to think it was a really good idea to have a separate bank account. What I found is that in the real world, it almost never works for somebody who is bringing in sporadic income. Because what often happens is the expenses come before the income comes in. There may not be any
Right.
money in the business account to make the purchases. But legally speaking, it doesn't matter whatsoever. For a sole
Okay.
proprietorship, uh, you and the business are one entity. And we'll get into that a little bit more also. It's like,
Awesome.
when are you separate from the business? When do you have to have a separate business account?
Perfect.
Uh, so it's not necessary to have the account be separated, to have the where the money's coming from be separated. What's important is just keeping track of it in a separate manner. And you don't have to keep track of your personal purchases whatsoever. Obviously, that's totally up to you whether you want to do that. Like I do, but I'm a numbers guy. I keep track of anything with numbers. It's easy for me. Um, you know, strangely enough, I enjoy it. Most people I find do not. So, and I know people who own their own small business that their bookkeeping consists of stuffing receipts into a shoebox and then handing it to their accountant. That's one way. It's not a particularly great way, and it's rather expensive in terms of paying the accountant to sort through the shoebox full of receipts. But it's legit. It's actually a perfectly appropriate way, or at least the legally appropriate way, to maintain separate records. So, another thing that relates to whether or not the expense is a business expense.
Right.
It's whether or not it is something that goes towards producing income.
Mm.
So I was thinking about this earlier today, especially in the realm of makeup and outfits.
Because that is such a huge part of the sex worker, like, gray lines. Because,
Yes.
so much of sex work is really, it's so subjective. It really is. Like, okay, like, are you counting this as a relationship, or are you counting this as not? Like, are you counting this as for work, or are you counting it as not?
Yeah. Now, if you actually did purchase clothing that you only used for money-making encounters,
So here's
you
then
could
then the question
claim that.
is, so okay, so yes, but let's say I buy all of my clothes. I don't buy a lot of clothes that are just like chillin' clothes.
Yeah.
I all of my clothes are like work clothes. So let's say that I buy clothes for a photo shoot. But then what? Am I not allowed to use them for my personal life? Like if I want to wear those shoes, just because, even because I bought them for a shoot, but like now I still have them. Like, does that change the property of it? Like, how does that fit in?
That is an excellent question also. Uh, that's actually getting into some sketchy territory because it cannot have any component of personal use. And in fact, ideally, it should not even be suitable for personal use. So that's where clothing that would be appropriately used for some kind of personal usage, probably not advisable to try and claim as a business expense. Um, but if you're talking about something that's too revealing, say, to wear in public, well, that might be pretty easy to justify. Like, no,
Yeah,
I
but
really can't
also here's
use
the
this
thing:
for
is
personal
like,
purpose.
I live in LA, so I could wear any of this. I could wear any of this in public. Nothing's
Yeah.
too revealing to wear in public in Los Angeles.
So, that's where it may actually be dependent on where you live, because in Salt Lake City, Utah, things are rather different. Manhattan, anything goes. Like anything goes, including being topless walking around on the streets. So, yeah, you'd have a hard time saying you couldn't use it for personal purposes in a situation like that. But there is another category that would have something be not for business purposes.
Oh, do tell.
If it is something that you wear, I'm trying to think how to frame this as it would most directly relate. So this is what I was thinking of earlier today. If you were wearing something, say, to a convention, but you were just there as an attendee, I'm thinking like cosplay. People spend a lot of money and work very hard at making the outfits that they wear out in public, but not because they're going to be producing an income from it. That would be a hobby expense. Everything changes, however, if someone's hired to make an appearance in that outfit. So that is another fine line. It's a test.
Right.
And in this case, it may be more of an analogy for one's own, for us to figure out. It's like,
Right.
okay, is this particular purchase
It all kind of comes down to like, can
business?
you argue for it? I guess, really,
Yes.
mostly.
And that is where these things often get decided.
Right.
They often are decided in tax court, and there are certain
You said
tests.
tax court, and the way you said tax court, I just like imagine a whole theme song like tax court, you know.
Dun, dun,
Da-da-da.
dun. Now on Spike TV, tax court.
We can't be serious. we we have an inability to stay serious for more than 15 minutes at a time.
Yeah, and I think I used up a good chunk of my 15 minutes there.
Yeah. All right. We've now
So,
recharged. We can move on with the seriousness.
all right.
We got some silliness out.
Oh my goodness. So the next thing we moved on to was where there are certain things that they're legit business expenses, but people fall into traps. A couple of the specific ones we mentioned are meals and entertainment deductions. There's certain tests that you have to meet for it to count as a business expense. Namely, you have to be able to testify. Again, now this is a perfect example of something. There's no paperwork to record this on, but you have to be able to testify that the meal or the entertainment was necessary for discussing business or the conduct of business, and you have to be able to document all the persons who were attending the meal or the entertainment. That's one pitfall. The other one is usage of a vehicle. And people automatically want to say, well, this tank of gas was for business. And that's a flat out no. You can never do that. If you're not going to be claiming, well, let's say claiming, if you're not going to be recording all of the expenses for your vehicle, insurance, depreciation, maintenance costs and whatnot, and then taking a percentage of that for just the business usage, who wants to do all that work? You don't need to. You do much better claim the mileage. So if you are driving to any kind of a gig, then you want to keep track of how many miles you drove. And then that is what you can use to calculate a business deduction. That's way, way more above board, legit, appropriate, etc.
I have maybe potentially slightly off-topic question, which is, what do you
Sure.
think is the thing, like one thing that people don't claim enough on their taxes that would probably save them the most money? Like, what is something that I can do throughout the year that will save me the most money on my taxes?
I don't have an easy answer off the top of my head.
Yeah. Like as
Chances
a
are,
freelancer specifically.
yeah, some of the things that occur to me would be something that you could claim a percentage of as business use. Now that's much less clear cut. Generally, the IRS wants something to be 100% business or not at all business if it's used for personal purposes at all.
Right.
But say, for example, your internet connection. If you're doing any kind of streaming, your internet connection is vital for your business. But there's little chance that you are using a separate internet connection for anything personal.
Right.
That would make no sense. Well, You could do an estimate of what percentage of the usage of that internet connection is for business purposes and what percentage is for personal. And you'd want to keep that a conservative estimate, uh, because it's already getting a little sketchy
And I do
to
remember us
use it at all.
saying something about similarly claiming a section of your home. So, for instance,
Yes.
I have an entire office that's just like a cam room. Like, I don't use it for anything other than filming and taking photos. That's just what
Yep.
it is. And I'm gonna put a makeup
Yeah.
table in there, and I'm gonna do my makeup in there, and that's
That's perfect. That's a perfect example. Um, you've hit the key criteria that has to be met for that space. So here, the split that I'm talking about between business and personal is your living space,
right.
whether you own a home or whether you're renting.
Well, let's say that. So let's say that I intend to also use that space as a guest room because I do.
Yeah.
So
That would then nix the ability to claim it as a home office. Now, if you did have it, now many people may have a room dedicated to a dedicated studio, dedicated workspace, and that is completely legitimate to claim. It's the home office deduction for people who are filing as a sole proprietor. There's a line for home office. In fact, let me reach over and look at the tax form here, because it's moved around. One of the things that has changed in tax laws is where the home office deduction appears. Yeah, it's moved to a different form, so I'm gonna have to find that.
You don't just
But
know
there's
everything.
Not anymore. Nope. So the answer there is you would be claiming the percentage by square footage, the percentage of your living space that is dedicated 100% to the business purpose. So the way to get around it for that room that you use partially as a guest room and partially for the studio, essentially, is you have the guest room on one side of the, use one side of the room as the guest room, the other side
Oh, that's
as the
sneaky.
workspace.
Okay, I love this.
And
what about
you're only taking the share of the room as a share of the whole living space as the dedicated workspace. And then you would meet the test, and that's a legitimate deduction.
Amazing. Love this. Love this. Can I also claim this tiny little section of my living room that
Well, I don't know. I've seen you answer a phone call while you were sitting in that section.
No, it's true. I don't feel like moving my cam setup is really what it comes down to. I'm like, look, it's all set up already. Don't have to do anything.
Yeah, that probably makes it not really deductible.
Rats.
And then, of course, if you actually counted the number of square feet, you'd be like, what is this? 7 square feet out of my whole apartment?
Yeah, but it's 7 square feet that I can not pay taxes on, so.
Yeah.
And on that note.
But to your larger point,
Yeah.
it's like, are there other less obvious deductions that people can take? Yeah, yes, but they get down to finer and finer levels of detail and requirement for them to pass the tests. And I don't know that there's really much more I can say about that without it being a very specific question.
Right.
So we'll leave it at that.
Right. So.
All right. So should we move on to what we covered then in the second
yeah,
video?
let's do it.
All right. So in the second video that we did in 2019, we talked more of the technical aspects of doing one's taxes. We talked about the different structures that your business can take and distinguished between what's a tax structure and what's a legal structure. So you've probably noticed that there are a lot of companies around right now that have LLC at the end of their name. That stands for limited liability company. That is not a tax structure, that's a legal structure. And it's simply a set of legal documents, a write up of statements that create a wall of separation between oneself as an individual and the business. Mostly so that if the business gets sued, your home, your personal assets, are not subject to seizure or forfeiture to fulfill the lawsuit. Independent of that structure is how you create your business as a tax entity. The easiest one is the one we've been referring to so far is as a sole proprietor. And in this case, you and the business are one. The business is simply one of the income streams that you have as an individual. Then there's one that's a half step removed from that, which is a single member LLC. In this case, you are protected by the documentation that is written up, the legal documents, as an LLC is protected. But for tax purposes, you function almost the same as a sole proprietor. There's a slight difference in that the LLC is treated as what's called a pass-through entity, meaning it is not a tax entity unto itself, or it is not a taxable entity. Whatever the profit of one's single member LLC, whatever profit it makes, just then passes right on through to the taxpayer. So that gives you a little bit of the protection, or actually, it gives you a fair amount of the protection of the legal structure. It only involves slightly more paperwork, more so on the legal document preparation side than on the tax side. And then mostly the tax preparation is relatively simple and relatively the same as being a sole proprietor. Then the next level up from that is an S corporation. And this is where your business must be registered with the state and the federal government as an S corporation. But it is not taxed as a taxable entity. It is also just a pass-through. And then you must report the income from that. There's a special place, a special spot on a certain tax form to record your income from that business entity. But that one gives you complete separation and protection from the business. So you and the business are two separate entities. But there's substantially more paperwork to complete with that. A lot more T's to cross and I's to dot in order to maintain that, to set that up and maintain that structure.
So for just someone who is an independent content creator, let's say that they cam and they make content from their own home. Is there any advantage that you see to one over the other, one structure over the other?
That's a good example, because in that particular example, one's exposure to risk is very low. Mm-hmm. And if one's exposure to risk is low, again, particularly risk of lawsuits, there's less need to form the complex structures of an S corporation or even an LLC necessarily. Sole proprietor is probably fine. And particularly if you also have a day job, just a regular wage earning job. If you just are doing some extra work on the side, as I do, I have a 9 to 5, 5:36, 6:37 job.
Occasionally 8.
And occasionally 8. Yes. But the bookkeeping work I do for clients and the landscape design proposal work I do for clients is just a little bit of work I do on the side, and I just do all that as a sole proprietor for simplicity's sake.
Right.
And that would probably be comparable to something that one does if one just has, a little bit of camming work they do on the side, something like that. An occasional shoot or gig or consultation.
Any debt counseling.
Any debt counseling. Oh, you remember that.
Hey, come on. Throwback.
Yeah, she was talking about counseling people into debt. Into debt to me. So, and where we ended, so that was quite a discussion.
Yes.
In that second video.
Which, by the way, everyone can go back and watch. Everything that we've discussed so far, you can go back and watch in its entirety. Just go to goddessfoxtube.com and it'll be there. So.
Yeah. And I found you can also Google SW tax info with no spaces, or enter it as a search on YouTube. SW tax info.
Glad that you know that.
I got it that way, but it's been touch and go. Sometimes it worked for me, sometimes it didn't.
You can also go to goddessfoxtube.com. Which is reliable. Oh, look, it's been another 15 minutes. We must be silly again. We can't handle it. So, okay, so that being said, recap, cool, close the book, move on. It's 2021. A lot has happened since then. Is there anything specifically that we talked about 2 years ago that's just drastically changed?
The only I can't even call it a significant change, really. One of the things that we wrapped up with was talking about what specific forms one would use to complete their taxes as a business, as a sole proprietor.
Right.
And they consolidated some of the tax forms. So I'd mentioned that for the tax year 2018, which we were talking about in 2019, they had taken the old-fashioned 1040 form and they had split out certain lines onto 6 additional schedules. Fortunately, they've consolidated those 6 schedules down to just 3. So, blessings, there's half the number of potential forms that one would need to fill out. However, to do the whole complete sequence of filling out one's taxes as a sole proprietor, it only reduced it from 6 forms down to 5 that one has to use. Only 2 of the forms got combined onto a single one. So it still has those steps. And the sequence is Schedule C, Schedule SE, Schedule 1, then Schedule, wait, I got it right here. Schedule 2, and then your 1040.
I already
I'm not going to go into those
this.
forms. But since I went into it in detail last time, that's the brief summary of the sequence to complete it that way.
Awesome.
So that is really the only major change. Of course, the dollar limits and thresholds, they increment up by small amounts each year.
Inflation.
Yeah, literally. For example, the newly created in 2018 standard deduction was $12,000. Well, now it's $12,400. Whoop-de-doo.
Word. Is there a way that would impact? Like, how could that impact somebody? Like, in.
That particular thing wouldn't impact the business side of someone completing their taxes. That's although we've been asked, what about that? That would be um, the judgment calls to whether or not one itemizes their taxes.
Right.
So let me talk a little bit about that. That's a common question. That's not a business question, but it's a question
Yeah.
that everybody faces at some point if they're filling out their federal taxes. Uh, the deal is, if you can add up your itemized deductions, which would be your state and local taxes, your charitable giving, your medical expenses, if you had a lot of them, because you can only count whatever is more than above 7.5% of your gross income, your adjusted gross income, I believe. So you'd have to have a lot of medical expenses for that to even start to add to your itemized deductions. And then there's a few other small items like mortgage interest deduction that's still on there. There's subject to limitations and whatnot. If all those add up to more than 12,400, itemize. You'll save money. Many people will not hit that threshold. In this case, you take the standard deduction. Take your 12,400 and be done with it. One minor new thing about that. Part of the new COVID laws, not the recent ones, but the ones that were passed back in early 2020, allows you to, on top of the standard deduction of the 12,400, you can claim an additional $300 up to $300 of charitable donations. That's good to know.
Yes. Love that.
If you happen to have donated that much to charity. But, it's like when I got my first stimulus payment back in whatever that was, May, I turned around and gave most of it to programs feeding people.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I was okay.
Yeah, it's like if other people do need this money more than me. Yeah.
Definitely more than I do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but as it turns out, for me personally, it's like, nope, I still did better by itemizing. So
yeah,
I could have taken 300 of that and claimed it on top of the standard. Nope, I did better to itemize. Just thinking, is there anything else while I'm on the topic of more personal tax matters? Nothing coming to the top of my head.
So we did get a couple of questions for this year.
Excellent.
And I'm thinking maybe we'll dig into a couple of them, and then next week we'll dive into the rest of them.
Yeah.
Or no,
and
not
people
next
can
week.
Feed us
When
more
is
questions.
it? It's 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Yes.
That's what I meant to say. 2 weeks from now. So on the 28th, March 28th, at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, we will be back and we will be answering more questions. So if you have questions between now and then, you can go to swtax.info and you can send in your questions. So we did get a couple of questions though, that we'll go over, and then we'll go over the rest next time along with whatever other questions we get. So one question is, like, is there a tax prep software that you think is the ideal tax prep software? Like, is there something that you would really recommend as an accountant, as somebody who like actually knows things about taxes?
Yeah. There's like 3 levels for what one could use for well, there's also the difference between tax prep software and your record keeping software.
What is the difference?
So the record keeping software would be if you were actually entering your receipts, keying in the numbers into a program or even a spreadsheet to keep track of them. That depends on the size and complexity of your business and the likelihood that it will grow into something larger and more complex. So if your business is super simple, the lowest tech version of record keeping, as I mentioned, is the shoebox full of receipts. Um, the step above that, which is vastly preferable, would be just using a spreadsheet. Uh, Google Sheets if you want to do it online, Excel if you happen to have access to it. Um, that's a very simple way. You only need a column for each category, and you probably won't have that many categories, um, because you certainly aren't going to be filling out, like the special category for providing fuel oil supplies, your mining expenses,
I don't know
your
about you, but
farm
I have a lot of
expenses.
mining expenses. I'm like
So,
up to here in mining expenses. Like I can't get rid of them. This is actually just a giant preview for our future podcast, which will only consist of silliness. We're just putting a little bit of silliness in now so that people are hooked.
so, uh, next step up for very modest record keeping, something like Quicken. Does Quicken even exist anymore? I haven't looked into it in 20 years.
I'm sure it
Um,
does. Quicken has to
but then there's
exist.
QuickBooks. QuickBooks is what you would want to
Wait,
use
Quicken
if
and
your
QuickBooks
business.
aren't the same thing?
No, they're not. Quicken is like oriented for
Amazing.
homeowners. QuickBooks is for actual business people. And, um, I had one client
What makes an
that when he
actual
started out,
business person?
yes, it started out with him and two guys. That was his business. And
Quicken
I was
still
training
exists.
him.
The internet says so, by the way.
Yes, okay, good. Thank you. So I was training this guy how to key in his own expenses into QuickBooks. I touched base with him a couple years ago, and his business that had been him and two guys is now him and 160 employees and 5 offices. And he's still using QuickBooks. It's not a great match at that size, but we're probably not really going to be getting to that level. So, but if your business was going to grow into something that's got many tendrils, that would be a good software to use. I've worked with it with many clients over many years, and it will do pretty much all that you need it to do for a small to mid-sized business. So then there's tax prep software, and uh, I don't use tax prep software, but I have coached people through using some of the free tax prep software, and I don't know that there's really any difference among them. Uh, they have places you just you just look up, free tax filing software, um, and the system will talk you through all the things that you need to fill out. I don't know how good they are for doing business taxes, but I have another client who does people's business taxes, and he uses um, TurboTax. So it's good enough for an accountant to use for filing people's business taxes. Um, and I think that's about all that I have to offer in terms of the two categories of software that one could use. Counting, the shoebox full of receipts as the lowest level of software. So what else we got? Oh no, where'd your sound go?
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Yeah, it's fine. I muted my mic and I didn't realize it. It's fine. I listen. I know how to use technology. I'm good at this. So, okay. So,
You have to turn off your camera to pick your nose.
yeah, no, secretly that's what I was doing the whole time. No, I was stretching and I was making like stretch grunts, Like I just like muted, you know?
Yeah, like that.
Like as
Yeah,
you do. As you do. You know, it's really great that I have control over when you get seen and when I get seen. You get seen all the time. I get to take breaks.
I cannot pick my nose in private on this live stream.
You could if you did the boomer thing.
Oh, you're like, what? What's that?
What is that?
Nothing going on down here. Nope, nothing at all. Sit here. And now I'm back.
And now we're back. So, we kind of went over this, but we were asked, should you register as a business if you're a gig worker?
Actually, yeah, there's a finer point on that one.
Oh, beautiful. Love that.
Yeah. It's the registering the business portion of it. So that kind of combines two of the topics we were talking about.
Right.
If it makes sense for you to stay simple and a sole proprietor, you don't have to register anything. You can. You can register your business with the federal government or with the state, but you don't need to. You can just be yourself as an individual, as the tax entity, and you can just say you do business as whatever the name is of your business, which might be your screen name or your public name.
And is that are you saying like officially file for a DBA, like a doing business as?
No, what I'm saying is you don't have to do that.
Oh.
Because you can just say that's what you do. You can just say that's the name I use.
Then why do people pay to do it?
Well, if you want to copyright your name.
Okay. All right, yeah.
Then that's a different matter. But if you're just using, a cute phrase, like have you old Fox Riker? There's a number of hits out there for it. So if you wanted to lay sole claim to that name, you'd probably be looking at doing some paperwork.
Oh, okay, fair. I was like, I haven't Googled it recently. Is there something I should know?
Well, that was me trying to find, the alternate route to your channel.
Oh, fair.
Let's try that. Ooh, that did not work.
Why did you spend so much time trying to find the channel? Just like out of like curiosity's sake? I
was away from my computer and I didn't have any of the links that we use and everything. I was just trying to how do I
you
get
hate
there
me,
again?
so you didn't want to text
try
me.
And find it.
It's fine. I understand.
I mean, I was sitting in the emergency room for a friend, so
okay,
yeah,
all right.
I wasn't thinking all the most logical ways to do something.
That's fair. I tend to also not think of all the most logical things to do about things when I'm in the emergency room.
Each time.
Yeah, all those times. Actually, this is tangential because we're talking about taxes, but I out of general rule don't go to the emergency room because I don't want to be slapped with emergency room prices.
Exactly.
I'd rather just suffer. It's fine.
Yeah, and that's a conversation for I don't know, maybe
podcast.
A podcast.
God, we're disgusting. We're gonna be amazing. We're gonna have the best podcast of all time. I've already listen. I don't care if you're joking. I'm not joking. We should do a podcast. Okay, so moving on from this, this has been an advertisement for our future podcast. The end.
That doesn't exist.
That doesn't exist yet, but it will. Okay, so are certain job codes actually let's do this and then we'll call it for this week, I think. Because we're at about an hour and I think that's decent. That's like a decent chunk of time for anyone to have been watching us.
Hopefully we've been providing lots of entertainment.
Listen, we can talk for hours. This has been proven. But we'll give you a break. We'll give you a 2-week break. So, are certain job codes safer to use? So and also it's interesting. I think about this too when I have been traveling or when I applied for my passport, things like that. Are there things that you can think of that would raise less red flags? Because the fact of the matter is, right now, sex workers are, we've we got a hard time of it. We're not doing so well.
Yeah.
There's a
Not a
lot.
lot of travel going on.
Right,
For anyone.
exactly. So, I'm just wondering, like, because there's such a stigma, is there something, well, actually, let me say it like this. Because there's such a stigma, I know that.
Time to hydrate, stretch, tweet, and eat.
We know. It's fine. Everybody hydrate.
Stretch.
Stretch. Yeah, hydrate, stretch. This is your reminder. Thanks.
Hydrate.
Thanks, babe. My Google Assistant is Google assisting me. So, I know that I'm not the only person who feels like just admitting that I'm a sex worker in any kind of legal or tax related situation puts me on a list. And I don't want to be on lists. I mean, I'll be on some lists, but not that kind of list. I'm not interested in being on that kind of list. Because that kind of list, I think, leads to oppression. And I'm not interested in being oppressed. So I'm wondering, like, do you, like, that is such a good, I know, it's crazy, right? I'm being repressed. I'm being oppressed. So I guess, I'm also curious because, like, from not just like, oh, is it like safer to use this kind of job code versus that kind of job code, but also just like are there ways that you can see people, other kinds of freelancers too, who maybe aren't sex workers, just sort of staying as much out of the IRS's view as possible? Because I think that's like,
Yes.
ultimately that is what taxes comes down to. It's like, how do I raise the least flags for the IRS?
Yes. And I will just refer that we did actually talk about red flags in
Yes.
In one of our previous videos as well. We covered that. We talked about that to some fair extent. What things do raise red flags. So here is the bottom line for which code to pick. It's the one that actually sounds the most similar to what you do. Not surprising at all that that's the answer. Because what the IRS is using those job codes to do is have a rough idea of what kinds of expenses one would see. And remember, the IRS is not asking, was this expense used to buy lingerie? They're not asking down to that level of detail. They're just looking for, was it business supplies or was it advertising? But, for example, my mom is a deaconess. She actually does produce a minuscule amount of income from that. So she does have to claim the income. But she's not going to pick a job code that would say be expected to have a high level of advertising. Or conversely, she wouldn't be able to claim a large advertising expense if she was just reporting that she earned her money as not quite clergy, but as a church lady. She's a church lady. Advertising would not be an expense that one would ever see in that line of work. But if you do anything on the internet, you might have an advertising expense. So that's legit. So the two that I thought of, already, or the two that I mentioned earlier in this stream, would be consulting and modeling. So those are two that the expenses will probably be close to what you're actually tallying up for yourself. But there's hundreds and hundreds of them.
So are you saying that that when it comes to like the code, like basically the code, like, so you're saying that the codes are used to basically just tell the IRS what red flags they should be looking for? So like if I put myself as a consultant, but I've got like a crap ton of like entertainment things that I'm, if I'm doing more in categories that like don't line up with a typical consultant, is that what those codes do? Is that what that's looking for?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the trick is,
And it's not that they're looking for red flags. Right. It's that they're just looking for what roughly is typical.
right.
Because the test is this expense ordinary and necessary for this type of business? Well, first question is, what's the type of business? And that's all. That's all that they're really using that for. So what you'd be doing is looking for a job code and looking at the job description that's listed and saying, okay, what kinds of things would be typical in that line of work? And again, very broad brush strokes here. The IRS is only looking at large categories of expenses, and they're just looking for big swings of dollar amounts. It's like if you only had a few tens or hundreds of dollars of advertising expense, it wouldn't really matter what field you're in. It's like that's not surprising. It's not noteworthy. But if you were, I'm trying to think what would even be something that would imply that you did not travel. I can't even think of a job code that would imply that you don't travel. And then you reported a lot of travel expenses. Well, then that's not a good job code to use. But like you mentioned, consulting, it's pretty normal for a consulting to have a lot of travel. That's not noteworthy. So that's probably fine. And it's not like there's a category called clothing or makeup. The category doesn't even go into that. It's just going to be materials or supplies. That's all it would be. It's the same category you'd use for, buying paper for your printer in the office. So there's not really much need to worry about the really fine level of detail of what the precise expenses are. It's really just the big picture. And that will keep you out of the finer gaze of the IRS.
Which is really all any of us want anyway.
Indeed.
Let's just not get noticed by the IRS. That's all we care about. Well, I think that's a good spot for us to pause. Have a 2-week intermission and come back talking a little bit more about anything that y'all want to hear about. I mean, like, seriously, send us questions. We want to answer them. This is for you. We want this to be useful to you. So if you can help us make it more helpful to you, then we will be grateful for that. Also, if you feel like sending a donation for our time, you can send it to paypal.me/swtax. Is it SW Tax Info? Okay, yeah, all right. Listen, I haven't done this for 2 years. It's fine. I'm out of practice. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about like certain expenses that you can or can't claim. We'll be talking about additional tax forms, issues with reporting losses for multiple years, things like that. And then like you said, like I said, like who said, like somebody said it.
I heard of it.
Echo. So we're ridiculous. We're ridiculous. I can't with us. So we'll be back with more tax information stuff. If you are a freelancer and you're not a sex worker, listen, like, we get it. Like, a lot of things that freelancers deal with, sex workers are also freelancers. So, if you have any questions that you want to send in and you're not a sex worker, but you do think that a lot of what we're talking about could be applicable to you, or you think that's a question that you have could be applicable to a sex worker, absolutely send us any questions you have. The more the more you want to know from us, the more we can give to you and to everyone else who might also be interested in knowing that. So, so thanks.
I would like to
Yes.
acknowledge we actually do have more questions. We already do have some questions that came to us, but they were getting much more specific, and I wanted to at least start us off with this video in touching all of the biggest picture points initially, letting you all know if there was a particular topic that you wanted to get more detail about, that we did cover in detail in one of the earlier videos. You now know, I ran down what we covered. You'd be able to find it. But for the people who asked more specific questions, and thank you.
Yes.
We saw them, we got them, and we will go into more detail in the next live stream.
So we will see you on March 28th at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and also probably, if you're watching this and it's past that date, then you can just go and watch the next one right now. So it's all on goddessboxtube.com, which you can just go to, and you don't have to search for a million different things. You
over the internet.
You can just go to goddessboxtube.com. Don't be like Jay.
Be a little like Jay.
No, be a little like Jay. Be a lot like Jay. Just don't like waste your time looking for something that you could easily go to goddessboxtube.com to find.
All right.
Well,
thank you
all so much for hanging out, and we hope this has been informational for you. If it hasn't, let us know how we can make it be more informational for you. And we will. We'll see you in 2 weeks or immediately after this is over, for those of you who are watching after the fact. Have a good one, and like my Google Assistant said, remember to hydrate. Bye.
Bye.